Welcome to Unwrap Reality, where we narrate stories on things that happen in real life.
You never think it'll happen to you that the two people who know your soul best could betray you in the cruelest way possible. I used to believe love was a fortress, something unshakable. I thought if you built it strong enough, with trust, laughter, and shared dreams, it would protect you from anything life threw at you. But betrayal doesn't knock on the door, it sneaks in when you least expect it, wearing the faces of those you hold dear. That's how quickly my life unraveled, all because of one careless comment I didn't even mean. A single sentence, muttered under my breath after too much wine, set off a chain reaction that changed everything. And now, looking back, I realize how naive I was to think I had control over any of it. Looking back now, I can see the cracks forming long before everything collapsed. The late-night arguments that felt trivial at the time, the kind where you roll your eyes and say, "We're just stressed," as if that makes it okay. The missed calls I chalked up to bad reception or busy schedules. The growing distance between us masked by polite smiles and rehearsed routines. None of it seemed real until the moment I walked into my own apartment and saw them together. It wasn't just their bodies tangled in my sheets, it was the look on Alex's face when he realized I knew. Shame. Guilt. And worse, pity. Like I was some fragile thing about to break. In that split second, I hated him more than I ever thought possible. That's when I decided revenge wasn't just an option, it was a necessity. Not for closure, not for justice, but to prove to myself that I still had power over my own story. Because here's the thing about betrayal, it strips you bare, leaving you questioning every choice, every word, every moment you trusted someone else with your heart. So, what do you do when the world feels like it's crumbling beneath you? You find someone else's foundation and shake it right back. For me, that meant turning to Jake, Alex's older brother, and using him as my weapon. But let me tell you, revenge is rarely as satisfying as it seems in the movies. Let me take you back to the beginning, before everything went sideways. My name is Riley, and I'm not the kind of person who sits around waiting for life to happen. At 29, I had built a life that looked good on paper, a cozy apartment in the city, a job I loved teaching creative writing, and a circle of friends who felt more like family. People always said I lit up rooms, but inside, I craved stability. That's what Alex gave me, or at least, that's what I thought he did. He was the yin to my yang, or so I believed. Our lives intertwined seamlessly, or so it seemed. But now, I realize appearances can be deceiving, especially when you're too close to see the cracks forming. Alex was magnetic, the kind of guy who could charm his way out of anything. Funny, spontaneous, and endlessly ambitious, he had this energy that drew people in. On paper, we were opposites. He was reckless where I was cautious, restless where I sought peace, but somehow, it worked. Or so I believed. Our home reflected that dynamic perfectly, mismatched furniture pieces from thrift stores, shelves lined with books we promised to read together, and photos capturing moments I once thought were untouchable. Yet beneath the surface, maybe those differences weren't strengths after all. Maybe they were fault lines just waiting to split wide open. And honestly, I think part of me knew it long before the betrayal came to light. And then there was Jake, Alex's older brother. Quiet, steady, and almost invisible next to Alex's larger-than-life personality. We'd never been close, Jake lived hours away, and our interactions were polite but distant. Still, I remember joking once that Jake seemed like the better version of Alex. Stable, thoughtful, someone who wouldn't gamble with people's hearts. It was just a throwaway comment, something I said without thinking. Little did I know how true those words would become, and how much they'd haunt me later. Sometimes, the people you overlook are the ones who end up changing your life in ways you never expect. Things started shifting between Alex and me long before the betrayal came to light, though I didn't want to admit it at the time. At first, it was small stuff, things I told myself didn't matter. Like the time he forgot our anniversary because he was swamped at work. Or the way he'd zone out during conversations, distracted by texts I couldn't see. I convinced myself these were minor hiccups, nothing a little effort couldn't fix. After all, relationships aren't perfect, right? But deep down, I think I knew something wasn't right. The signs were subtle, almost imperceptible, but they lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. It's strange how hindsight sharpens your memory. Now, those moments feel glaringly obvious, but back then, I chose to ignore them. Then came the bigger cracks, the fights over money, his refusal to talk about the future, the nights he stayed out late without explanation. One night, while cleaning out his jacket pocket, I found a receipt for an expensive dinner at a restaurant neither of us had ever been to. When I asked him about it, he brushed it off, saying it must have been a client meeting. Something about the way he avoided eye contact made my stomach churn, but I let it go. Denial can be a powerful thing when you're afraid of the truth. Still, that nagging feeling grew louder each day, whispering doubts I wasn't ready to face. I started questioning everything, their friendship, my trust in Claire, even my own judgment. Was I overreacting, or was I missing something huge? What really got to me, though, was Claire. My best friend since college, the one person I trusted completely outside of Alex. She started pulling away too, canceling plans last minute or showing up distracted. I chalked it up to her busy schedule, but now I wonder if she was already slipping away from me even then. Looking back, the signs were everywhere, I just didn't want to see them. And when you ignore warning signs long enough, they stop being warnings and start becoming inevitabilities. By the time I finally pieced it all together, it was too late. The damage was done, and my world had already begun to crumble beneath me. What hurt most wasn't just their betrayal, it was realizing how blind I'd been to the fractures forming right in front of me. It wasn't some dramatic argument or a loud confrontation that shattered everything, it was silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than words ever could. I came home early one evening, expecting to find an empty apartment and a note from Alex about grabbing takeout later. Instead, I walked into our bedroom and froze. There they were, Alex and Claire, tangled up in my sheets, looking like strangers in a space that once felt sacred. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if time itself had stopped, leaving me suspended in this nightmare where nothing made sense anymore. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst, but even that felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words caught in my throat, choking me with disbelief. The look on Alex's face when he realized I was standing there is something I'll never forget. It wasn't anger or defiance, it was shame. Pure, unfiltered shame, mixed with a flicker of guilt that only made it worse. He didn't try to defend himself or offer some hollow excuse. Instead, he just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, unable to form a single coherent sentence. And Claire? She didn't even try to explain. She just sat there, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, refusing to meet my eyes. In that split second, I hated them both, not because of what they'd done, but because of how small they made me feel. Like I was invisible, replaceable. All those years we'd shared, the laughter, the fights, the dreams, suddenly felt like lies. They weren't just cheating on me, they were erasing me, rewriting history without my permission. Every memory we'd created together now felt tainted, like evidence of a betrayal I couldn't unsee. I don't remember much after that. Just fragments, grabbing my keys off the counter, slamming the door behind me, driving aimlessly through streets blurred by tears. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. How long had this been going on? Did anyone else know? Was any part of their friendship with me real? But beneath the anger and confusion was something sharper, more painful, a deep sense of failure. Not just theirs, but mine. I had trusted them completely, given them pieces of myself I couldn't get back. And now, standing outside my own life, I realized betrayal doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your faith in people, in love, in yourself. That night, as I sat in my car staring at the rain-streaked windshield, I promised myself one thing: I wouldn't let them win. If they thought they could destroy me, they were wrong. Revenge wouldn't just be an act of justice, it would be my way of reclaiming everything they tried to take away. The days that followed were a blur of numbness and rage, each emotion fighting for dominance in a way that left me exhausted. I moved out within the week, packing up my life into boxes that felt heavier than they should have. Every item I touched carried a memory, some good, most now tainted. The photo frames we'd laughed over at flea markets, the coffee mugs we'd bought on a whim during a weekend trip, even the throw blanket Claire had gifted me for my birthday last year, they all seemed to mock me, reminders of a life I no longer recognized. I told myself I was fine, that I could handle it, but the truth was, I didn't know who I was anymore. Betrayal has a way of stripping you down to your core, leaving you raw and vulnerable in ways you never expect. At first, I tried to play it cool, acting like their betrayal hadn't wrecked me. I threw myself into work, canceled plans with mutual friends, and avoided social media like the plague. But late at night, when the world was quiet and I couldn't distract myself anymore, the pain would hit me full force. I'd replay every conversation, every moment I thought was real, and wonder how I missed the signs. Did Alex ever love me, or was I just convenient? Was Claire's friendship ever genuine, or had she been biding her time until she could swoop in and take him? Those questions haunted me, gnawing at my self-worth until I started questioning everything about myself. Had I been too trusting? Too blind? Or was this just what people did: lie, cheat, and destroy without a second thought? But somewhere amidst the anger and self-doubt, something else began to surface: determination. I realized I couldn't let them win, not completely. If they thought they could erase me, reduce me to nothing more than collateral damage, they were wrong. That's when Jake entered my mind, not as Alex's brother, not as some distant figure I barely knew, but as a weapon. Dating him wasn't about love or closure, it was about power. About proving to myself that I still had agency, that I could turn the tables and make them feel even a fraction of what I felt. It was reckless, maybe even cruel, but I didn't care. Revenge isn't rational, it's primal. And as twisted as it sounds, the idea of using Jake to get back at Alex gave me a strange sense of control in a world that felt like it was spinning out of reach. Just when I thought I had the upper hand, life decided to remind me that karma has a way of biting back harder than you expect. Jake and I started dating, or at least, that's what we called it. In reality, it was more of an arrangement, a performance for Alex's benefit. At first, Jake played along perfectly, feeding into my plan with a calm detachment that surprised me. He didn't ask questions or push for explanations, he simply showed up when I needed him, his quiet confidence making the whole charade feel almost believable. But then something unexpected happened: Jake began to see through me. It wasn't dramatic or confrontational, he just started dropping subtle comments that cut deeper than any argument ever could. One night, after a particularly awkward family dinner where Alex barely concealed his jealousy, Jake turned to me and said, "You know, revenge isn't as satisfying as it looks in movies." His tone was light, almost teasing, but his words hit like a punch to the gut. For the first time, I wondered if he knew exactly why I'd pursued him, if he'd been playing me all along. When I pressed him about it, he didn't deny it. Instead, he admitted he'd suspected my motives from the start. What shocked me most, though, was his next confession: he had secrets of his own. Secrets that made me question whether I was the one being used this time. Suddenly, the lines blurred: was I still in control, or had I become a pawn in someone else's game? As if things weren't complicated enough, Alex showed up at my door one rainy evening, looking every bit as broken as I'd felt weeks earlier. He begged for forgiveness, claiming he'd ended things with Claire and wanted to fix what he destroyed. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, to tell him he didn't deserve a second chance. But another part, the weaker, more vulnerable part, hesitated. Was this genuine regret, or just guilt masquerading as remorse? And worse, did it even matter anymore? Because by then, I realized the real damage wasn't done by Alex or Claire, it was done by me. Somewhere along the way, I'd let my quest for vengeance consume me, turning me into someone I didn't recognize. The question now wasn't whether I could forgive them, it was whether I could forgive myself. In the end, I didn't choose either of them, not Alex, not Jake. Neither relationship felt real anymore, tainted by lies, manipulation, and the wreckage of my own making. Instead, I chose me. It sounds simple, almost cliché, but it was anything but. Walking away from both men wasn't just about ending toxic dynamics, it was about reclaiming the pieces of myself I'd lost along the way. For months after everything fell apart, I threw myself into rebuilding, not my life with someone else, but my life. I reconnected with old hobbies that used to bring me joy before I let relationships define me. I spent hours journaling late at night, pouring out every messy thought and emotion until the words stopped feeling so heavy. Slowly, painfully, I began to trust myself again. Trust, I realized, isn't something you give others lightly, it's something you earn within yourself. And only when you've rebuilt that foundation can you truly decide who deserves a place in your world. Looking back now, I see how much I've grown, even if the scars still linger. Betrayal taught me that people aren't always who they seem, no matter how well you think you know them. Alex, for all his charm and promises, was never as dependable as I believed. Claire, for all her loyalty and laughter, turned out to be someone I barely recognized. And Jake? He may have seemed like the safe choice, but his quiet strength masked complexities I wasn't ready to navigate. More importantly, though, betrayal taught me that revenge doesn't heal wounds, it creates new ones. Using Jake to hurt Alex didn't make me feel powerful, it made me feel empty, like I'd become the very thing I despised. Revenge is seductive because it tricks you into thinking it will restore balance, but the truth is, it only tips the scales further. By the time Alex showed up at my door begging for forgiveness, I'd already moved on, not to another person, but to a version of myself that didn't need validation from anyone else. Forgiveness, I've come to realize, isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of bitterness so you can move forward without carrying their baggage. So here I am now, standing on the other side of chaos, wiser but not unscathed. Love can be beautiful, messy, and devastating all at once, it's a gamble we take every time we open our hearts to someone else. But betrayal? That's where the real test begins. It forces you to confront not just others' flaws, but your own vulnerabilities. You question whether you missed signs, whether you were too trusting, or whether this pain could have been avoided altogether. But eventually, you realize the answers don't matter as much as what comes next. Have you ever faced a betrayal so deep it changed the way you see the world and yourself? If you have, I want to hear your story. Because while pain may isolate us, sharing it reminds us we're not alone. Pain connects us in ways happiness never could. And maybe, just maybe, that's where healing starts, with the courage to face our brokenness and the hope that we'll emerge stronger on the other side.